This is a special edition of the New Statesman podcast, the first broadcasted leadership debate between the candidates hoping to lead the Green Party. The battle to lead the Greens is underway. Campaigning has begun and it's a contest between the joint ticket of two of the four Green Party MPs, current co-leader Adrian Ramsay and Ellie Chowns, and the deputy leader and London Assembly member Zack Polanski. Voting will take place over August and we'll find out the results on the 2nd of September. So will the Greens roll the dice on the more activist campaign of the self-professed eco-populist Zack Polanski, or put their faith in two of their sitting MPs, who say they want to further professionalise the party to tackle the tough challenge of winning more seats under first past the post? Adrian and Zack, welcome to the New Statesman podcast, and thanks so much, both of you, for coming in.
Thanks for having us.
So before we get into the meat of our debate, can I ask each of you to tell me a bit about yourselves and make your pitch for being elected the next Green Party leader? Adrian, why don't you go first?
Thank you very much. Well, I've been co-leader with Carla Denyer for the last 4 years, and during that time, the Green Party has had unprecedented transformational electoral success. And that's no accident. It's because we've brought in a clear, focused strategy that's united the party, united our wider movement behind the idea that at this moment in time, we need Greens to have bigger influence and power than ever before, taking all of the many causes that we support from outside Parliament. Ellie and I have been campaigners for environmental and social justice all our adult lives and bringing that inside Parliament. And we can do that now because we've got 4 MPs. And when I became co-leader 4 years ago, I was told by lots of people outside the party and some inside, to be honest, that you've been stuck on 1 MP for such a long time. You'll never win a second, let alone a third or a fourth. And we did that through a determined and focused strategy. And it's that unprecedented success that we've had with our MPs, but also with doubling our number of councillors right across all corners of England and Wales, that we've now got to build on to bring in the record success at the next election. And we are hugely ambitious for our party. We want to win enough MPs next time that we can help shape the next government. We can help hold the balance of power in Parliament because our communities deserve that. And we're living at a time when Labour is just letting so many people down, whether it's on welfare cuts, whether it's on cuts to school budgets, whether it's on backsliding on climate and nature commitments, or the horrific genocide in Gaza. That's why we need Greens at the centre of politics. And we'll do that by holding to our distinct identity as a Green Party and building on the record successes that we've had of recent years.
Thank you so much. And Zack, over to you.
Yeah, I'm Zack Polanski. I'm deputy leader of the Green Party. I've been deputy leader for a few years now and have been part of a leadership team where I'm also really proud of the success that we've been making. I think we absolutely need more Green MPs, and that has to be front and centre of any future of the Green Party. Ultimately, we are in electoral politics, and this is about a vision to make sure we have so many more MPs. I absolutely agree. People voted Labour after decades of the Tories kind of letting us down, and they expected change. But when people look at Keir Starmer on so many issues, they're seeing more of the same. And in some issues, things seem to be getting even worse. The reason why I'm running for leader of the Green Party is because I think we need a bolder Green Party. Yes, absolutely, we need to win more MPs, but I think we do that through a community organising approach, through making sure that we're embedded with communities. I think people feel like Westminster has let them down. You don't have to talk to people about politics for very long before they tell you how sick they are of politicians and of Parliament. So I think what we really need to be doing is connecting with people on the ground. Now, I've demonstrated in the last few years as deputy leader my commitment to being everywhere around England, and I've toured Wales several times too. I think that connection of knowing what people on the streets are really saying when I'm knocking on doors, and then using that will absolutely bring more elected politicians to Parliament. Finally, I think we need to be bolder in terms of we need to say exactly what we stand for, and crucially what we stand against. No equivocation. Make sure that every single person in this country, not just people who already vote Green or are in the Green Party, but many more millions of people know the Green Party aren't just about the environment. Obviously, it's core to everything we do, but there's no environmental justice without racial, social, and economic justice too. I think it's about people knowing in this country that we have a whole suite of policies that will ultimately make this country so much better.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, both of you, for those articulate visions for where you want to take the party. What do you each think the party's priorities should be ahead of the next general election, whether that's on policy or on strategy, Adrian?
Well, I think on policy, we've got to absolutely call out the failures of the Labour government and show the distinctive identity that the Greens bring. We combine environmental and social justice. That's what makes us distinct as a party. We need to hold to that distinct identity. Whether it's Labour backsliding on climate and nature commitments, they've actually have gone in the wrong direction when it comes to restoring nature, for example, and on many of their climate commitments, or on social issues where my constituents I speak to all the time, there's nothing like being a constituency MP for being grounded in your community, whether it's growth in the use of food banks, whether it's people really worried about the effects of cuts to universal credit, which are still in the welfare bill, the dog's breakfast of a bill that we still have after last week, or whether it's on the horrific situation in Gaza and the complete failure of the Labour government to adopt what previous Labour foreign secretaries have commonly adhered to of an ethical foreign policy. Labour have failed on this time and again, and we're holding them to account week in, week out in Parliament. And the fact that we fought so hard to get a group of Green MPs in Parliament, it now puts us at the heart of the British political debate. We need to keep our leadership there, having won that. And my vision is one where we take the grassroots nature of the party. Ellie and I have got that lifetime record of being environmental and social campaigners. That's something we've done all our lives in the wider world and now in politics. And we want to take those causes, whether it's the cause for a wealth tax, whether it's the cause for a genuinely ethical foreign policy stopping the Gaza genocide, or whether it's about ensuring we're supporting the most vulnerable in society. On all those things, we're bringing those voices in. And we can show that Greens have got that alternative vision that so many people are crying out for, that I'm convinced can get us many more MPs elected, because we know how to do it now. We've shown that we can get Green MPs elected. We can do that on a bigger scale next time. And we'll be in a really strong position if there's a hung parliament to actually shape the future of the country. And having been part of a leading part of the Green Party, stepping up at so many times over the last 25 plus years that I've been involved, we're really now a pivotal movement to have a huge influence on the future of the country.
Okay, and Zack, if you were elected Green leader, what would your priorities be? Would they differ from, what Adrian has just laid out there?
Yes, I think it's about a relentless focus on lowering bills. Right. I think it's undoubtedly true that 89% of people with polling shows want to see strong action on the climate crisis. However, you hear constantly that people are very worried about their bills going up. And we know that's because the government have been subsidising all of the wrong things. And ultimately, what we need to be doing is making sure we're having a relentless focus that action on the climate will lower your bills. And we know that the likes of Nigel Farage and charlatans and Reform Party are constantly pushing this false binary that ultimately action on the climate will cost jobs or make things more expensive, when actually the exact opposite is the truth. Andrea Jenkins, who was just elected Mayor of Reform, her dangerous policies will lose 12,500 jobs. So I think we absolutely need to be out there on the front foot saying we stand with workers, we stand with the working class in this country, we stand with the precariat. And what I mean by the precariat is those people who are living bill to bill or job to job, who ultimately, if they just got sick for a few days, would lose their job. And there are so many people in this country who are facing that, just trying to get through on rent and putting food on the table. So absolutely, all the wider policies are really important. But I think in terms of connecting with the public, we need to connect with the real anger that's out there. And I don't mean just being angry ourselves, that's fueling the anger. Connect with the anger first and then put hopeful, possible solutions on the table that are tangible action. And finally, I'd just say in terms of a party, in terms of strategy, I think it's about focusing on the next generation. Leaders are not found, they are developed. And I think it's not acceptable that we don't have an MP that's in the north. I don't think it's acceptable that we are not as diverse as a party as I want us to be. So I really want to put an emphasis on training and development for future generations of MPs and indeed Green Party leaders to make sure that we're growing our team.
Okay, and you mentioned representation. You've chosen to run as a single candidate, whereas Adrian has been leading with Carla, but also is running on a joint ticket as well. Why did you choose to take that path? And then we'll speak to Adrian about why he perhaps thinks it's better to have two. Well,
the first thing I want to say is job shares are really important. So it'd be really easy for me in this race to try and turn it into, job shares are bad, et cetera, et cetera. And I don't believe that's true at all. I think it is important that the Green Party have a long tradition of being pioneers in terms of the importance of sharing the workload and sharing the team. However, as a sole leader, I will still have 2 deputy leaders. So the leadership team is still a team of 3. So that's continuing that teamwork. Right now, we have 4 MPs with 4 national profiles. What I'm arguing for is we will still have those 4 MPs, but adding a team of 3, so 1 leader and 2 deputy leaders, grows our team. That's essentially then 7 people with national profile who can put the party forward. I think the final thing I'd say is, since I've launched my campaign a month ago, this is about something like my 60th or 61st national interview. The media have been very interested in what a figurehead of the Green Party could be doing and could be saying. Now, again, I support job shares, but I think it's undoubtedly true in today's media environment. The media have found it confusing. They don't know who to go to. And ultimately, I think we need a leader of a movement who is absolutely about securing that grassroots community, making sure that it's not about them, but it's about the full team. But ultimately, the media know who to go to, who is going to speak for the party at any given moment when a crisis happens. What is the Green Party response?
Right. Okay, Adrian, what's your response to that? Because you've followed a different path in terms of running on joint tickets.
Well, indeed, and there's a few points I'd make. Either model could work, and actually it's about the individuals and it's about what strategy is going to work best for the party. Ellie and I have got that long track record in the wider movement, so we're well placed to bring that inside Parliament as we do week in, week out. And the reality of how the media works is, yes, media are interested in leadership elections, but in terms of what they'll be interested in after that, there are so many media programmes that only take MPs as part of their coverage. We saw when Caroline Lucas was MP, she was seen as the de facto leader, and people expect parties to have their leaders in Parliament. If you're a serious party, you're part of the mainstream political debate. We fought so hard to get there. We need to stay as part of that mainstream debate. Now, in terms of why I'm standing with Ellie, there's a number of reasons. Some of them are personal. I'm a dad of primary school age children. It works well for me to share the job, and it's worked very well standing with Carla. But some of them are political as well. And the Green Party does have a tradition, a different political culture to other traditional parties of the left or of all parts of politics. And that's about being very bottom up, being very collaborative in our style, and having co-leaders is a way of representing that, showing that we bring together 2 sets of skills, 2 sets of backgrounds, yes, building the profiles of those 2 individuals, but as part of a wider movement. And one of the things I'm very keen to do as the Green Party grows and we welcome more people into our party, our membership's grown substantially under mine and Carla's leadership, we need to protect the traditional values and culture of the party, which is about open and respectful debate, bottom-up approach to party leadership and running of the organisation, very grassroots. We need to protect and value those traditional approaches of the Green Party whilst continuing to professionalise and step up how we run things for ever greater impact.
Okay, and you both mentioned the media. I mean, a critique, voiced by many journalists about the Greens over the years has been their lack of a leader in the Nigel Farage style, someone who has a bit of a cult of personality around them and who, media programmes and journalists would flock to book, to tell the public what the Green Party's stance is on X issue. Zack, you've actually spoken explicitly about learning from Nigel Farage before. Is that part of your, A, running as a single candidate, but B, calling yourself an eco-populist and trying to channel the anger of the voters that you just mentioned?
I want to start this answer with I despise Nigel Farage's politics. So none of this is about taking any policy or any kind of cultural management from how Farage and his MPs behave. And also, I think Nigel Farage just blows Adrian's argument out the water. Nigel Farage was not an MP when he created huge transformational change in this country. Now, I think all of us in this room, or at least me and Adrian, would argue that Brexit has been a disaster, and none of that was positive for the country. But if we're talking about systemic processes, if we're talking about how Farage communicated before he was an MP, how he had a strong narrative, how he repeated that narrative, the media were not saying, you're not an MP, you can't have a seat at this table. He was all over the media. Now, I also accept that GB News is a 24/7 propaganda machine for Reform, and Reform have very deep pockets of multimillionaires and billionaires, so it's undoubtedly true that it's easier for them to get media time. That's why we've got to get better at podcasts. That's why we've got to get better at social media. We need to essentially find different ways of communicating with communities. I think I've demonstrated that over the last few years. My profile has significantly grown, but I'd also say it's not just about my profile. I've demonstrated that I use that platform and I use that profile to amplify other people. And I think ultimately all all of this, where we differ from Nigel Farage, is Farage is a one-man band. And when it goes wrong for Farage, we can hope it's going to go very wrong for Reform. I want to make sure the Green Party is resilient. So absolutely, yes, it's about me communicating on the media, but it's also about me using that platform to make sure, again, we're nurturing the next generation of Green MPs.
Adrian, Zack's mentioned his media appearances a number of times, and I wonder whether you found it difficult to cut through in that Westminster phrase that people use. I mean, obviously, you've been booked on many programmes since becoming leader and being an MP, but how much does it matter, and how much do you feel there's a barrier there?
Well, one of the barriers was that we didn't have our MPs in Westminster. We've now achieved that, and that has significantly increased the amount of coverage the Green Party's got over the last year. I have party members, people I speak to around the country, constituents saying they see so much more of what the Green Party's doing because we're in Parliament, and there are so many news programmes that look at what each party's saying in Parliament and use that to summarise what's each party saying on the day. And you could have a situation, and there has been the occasional issue, like on NATO, for example, where there have been different positions expressed between Zack and the MPs. If Zack was leader and is expressing one view and the MPs are in Parliament expressing another, who do journalists look to for who's speaking on behalf of the Green Party? There is a reason why parties have their leaders at the centre of political debate in Westminster. But let me just pick out what we've been talking about here in terms of populism, because I'd make a distinction between populism and being popular. Now, Ellie and I have a track record of showing we can take the Green Party message to the wider public. We're the only candidates in this election to have won first past the post elections, and we have done so repeatedly, first as councillors and now as MPs in seats that people said were unwinnable. And anyone can go into an election saying, I can make us popular. I think you have to look at the evidence, and the evidence that Ellie and I have got is that we've won first past the post elections for ourselves, for people around the country, leading the Green Party to have over 850 councillors. That's doubled from when Carla and I became co-leaders. And we've done that because we've communicated Green Party policies in a way that's built that broad support and won over people from across the spectrum, including people wanting a progressive voice in politics. So that's about being popular. Populism, though, and there is a difference between us here, I am very sceptical of. If you look at populist leaders in recent years, Boris Johnson being the obvious one, the cult of personality, all about the next day's headlines, but no coherent policy programme behind that. That's not the sort of politics I want to see. And I also don't want to see the type of politics you get from populism, which often brings about a divisive, polarising approach. Green politics is about bringing people together, respecting different views, having open discussion. And that's a culture I want to nurture inside the Green Party and in society.
Adrian, clearly very uncomfortable about that eco-populism label. Can you explain to our listeners what you actually mean by that?
Yeah, populism just means the 99% versus the 1%. So Adrian can't talk about a wealth tax at the same time as saying he doesn't support populism. Ultimately, it's about saying let's redistribute the wealth of the multimillionaires and billionaires in this country. People are earning money while they sleep, not with their hands, not with their brains, while the rest of us, the 99%, are struggling with broken services, with water companies pumping sewage into the water and then charging us extra for the privilege. The other thing I really want to say is that our most successful elections ever have been when our MPs are not in Parliament. In fact, the only time when we had a dip was when our leaders are not in Parliament. The only time we had a dip was when our leader was an MP, and that just meant that the amount of work that Caroline was fundamentally taking, which is totally understandable, I want our MPs working hard in Parliament, meant we didn't have as much time and space to talk to the country. Now, the MPs will have their own leader in Parliament. That's the head of the MPs. So ultimately, this is a co-leader model. It's me leading the movement and them leading the MPs. I do want to pick up on the NATO comment because I've heard Adrian say this a few times. I don't think what I'm saying is contentious, and I think Adrian's being a little bit tricky here, making it contentious.
Can I just explain to our listeners, it's that you have said that you think that Green Party, if it were in government, should take the UK out of NATO, whereas the Green Manifesto said committed to staying within NATO to reform NATO.
So it's much more nuanced than that. Our policy used to be to leave NATO. I believe Adrian abstained at conference on changing it to reforming within NATO. So it's interesting that you're taking a much stronger line now. My argument is since then, circumstances have changed. Donald Trump is threatening to annex Greenland. So anyone, even if they support NATO, has to say what happens if we trigger Article 5. Do we go to a war with America, or do we actually go, now is the time to build alliances based on diplomacy, based on peace with the global south, with our European neighbours and start looking at what alternative processes are. It is a misrepresentation of my view to suggest that I'm for leaving NATO right now. What I'm for is saying let's start a process of building those alliances so we're not reliant on Donald Trump, the same man, if you want to talk about the genocide in Gaza, who's saying he wants to turn Gaza into luxury condos. It is incoherent to say that we can maintain a special relationship with America when we have Donald Trump, a tyrant who is supporting Israel to the hilt, at the same time as saying we want peace and diplomacy in this world. I don't think that's contentious. I think that's just material reality and being coherent and honest about what faces us and saying we need to look at alternatives.
So you don't want to leave NATO?
Not immediately, but I want to look at a process about how we can build those alliances with the global south, with our European neighbours, which is partly why I wanted to stay in Europe. Ultimately, Europe is meant to be a peace project. Now, I think it's lost its way along the lines, but I think we're better within that project, reforming it and making sure that it is a peace project, rather than saying let's continue to keep these relationships with Donald Trump when 60 to 70% of the military is supplied by America within that bloc. I think most countries would say at the moment we are far too hoc for our international policy with America, and that's why we're seeing disastrous consequences around the world.
Okay, so how different is what Zack's laid out to, the prospectus that you represent on NATO, Adrian?
Well, I agree with a lot of Zack's wider analysis, but in terms of NATO specifically, Green Party conference did vote to change our position away from leaving NATO towards being part of a reformed NATO. And the reason we did that is because of the horrific imperialist aggression of Russia towards Ukraine and the need to have ever stronger international solidarity, including European solidarity. And I've been very clear, and I don't know how clear Zack has been, that we need to stand shoulder to shoulder with Ukraine. The Green Party has a very strong approach of opposing imperialist wars. I was deeply worried about the potential attacks on Iran, but we did say we were happy to support and willing to support sending military to support to Ukraine, to enable it to defend itself against a horrific attack from Putin, and that we need to have a peacekeeping agreement that Europe is at the centre of agreeing, and that the UK military may have a role in sending peacekeeping troops to Ukraine. And I'm very clear on those issues. I'm not sure how clear Zack is.
I'm really clear on those issues, but this is why we need a bolder Green Party. I'm talking about solidarity with Ukraine. Adrian's dodging the question and saying we can reform NATO from within. But there's no coherency about how that can possibly happen.
That's our policy, though, Zack. That's our policy.
Which is why, in a leadership election, you talk about what you think needs to change, and I think that policy is out of date, and I think most people would agree with that.
But is Adrian right, regardless of the substance of this issue, is Adrian right that it would make things awkward if a leader of the Green Party sitting outside of the MPs representing what it's committed to in its manifesto had a different view on an issue like this, fundamental issue?
Well, I'd start with the party doesn't have a whip, so potentially you could have 4 MPs with different fundamental issues, and we would work that out. I think this is saying that this is someone who speaks for the membership. Adrian's had issues where he's been out in the media and said, first and foremost, I'm a constituency MP. I stand for my constituents. What I'm saying is we need a leader of the movement who, yes, absolutely, I represent my constituents in London too, but ultimately we need someone who will speak for the movement and not just speak for a narrow constituency.
But Zack, there's nothing like being a constituency MP for being rooted in communities, and indeed the things you've talked about today around community organising. I mean, absolutely. That's why I wrote the How to Win Local Elections manual that's enabled the Green Party to have huge successes in growth in our council numbers around the country. Because what we were finding in all those places where we were having big success 10 or more years ago, when we wanted to share that success around the country, was it is all about listening to communities. It's about building support, starting with where people are at in communicating Green Party policies. So these are not new ideas. What's new is your suggestion that by having a big social media presence that we can somehow circumvent the really hard work that's needed to get many more people elected. I have heard you say that in certain debates. But on the issue...
I've never said. I've always said social media alongside target to win, so making sure that we're in those communities and building up. The other thing I just want to say, though, because Adrian doesn't know this yet, that you have to grow a team when you win elections. And actually, everyone who was in that team, the campaign organisers, the campaign managers, are now the vast majority endorsing me in this race. Just Adrian doesn't know that yet, but I'm going to be releasing next week, slowly, day by day, campaign managers and campaign organisers who are no longer in the party, who won elections for Sean Berry, for Carla Denyer, alongside them, obviously, as saying, actually, it was fundamental to have me in the room when making election strategy because I know how to win elections.
Who are these people?
So these are people who are the campaign organisers and campaign managers of the winning campaigns where we won MPs. Because obviously it's not just about the candidate. The candidate is an incredibly important part of this, But it's never one solo band, one solo person. This is always about having a team and growing a team. And actually, those people who are making the decisions, who are supporting the candidates, who are now our MPs, were saying that I was a vital part of those conversations. I was part of that organising. I was part of doing the media. And yes, I did loads of knocking on doors and strategy with them. And they're saying that was really useful contribution. So I'm not saying Adrian wasn't a useful contribution too. I'm not saying Carla, they were vital. But this idea that I don't know how to win elections or I wasn't a vital part of that team is both rude and disrespectful, but also I think it's disrespectful to the thousands of members who have been out there campaigning. They're the ones who got you elected.
Zack, I think you're being quite offensive in what you're saying there. Of course, there were hundreds of people involved in my campaign. Right. It was fantastic. And that was the case in all of the constituencies that we won. The first time I was elected as a councillor, I was 21, over 20 years ago. That was about building a team in the party at a time when we had very little profile nationally. We had very little resources. It was just about bringing a group of people together to make that impact. And we've scaled that up over time. Yes, it's about enthusing people, bringing more people into party membership, as we've done in ever greater numbers during the time that Carla and I have been co-leaders. So of course it's about team, absolutely. But the point I'm making is there is a fundamental difference between your experience of winning elections under proportional representation and the experience the party needs to win seats under first past the post, which is what's going to get us more councillors and more MPs elected.
But the campaign managers are saying differently.
Okay, so you've defended your position as a non-MP running to be Green leader, I think. But you did stand for the Lib Dems in 2015 and 2016. You know, that was a time when it was very high in the public, consciousness that the Lib Dems had backed austerity. They'd betrayed voters over tuition fees. It was a bit of a slump for them. I mean, how come you were still representing that party and your politics have changed since then?
Well, firstly, I massively believe in proportional representation. And back then in 2015, the Green Party weren't talking about it as much. Now, I've spoken to Natalie Bennett about this, who was leader at the time. And she said we'd have 5 seconds on media. Am I going to talk about proportional representation or am I going to talk about the climate crisis? So totally get that. But we're talking about proportional representation a lot more now. I think the key thing here, though, is I've been on that political journey and I know other people can be on that journey. And I think that's a real asset in a leader, actually, to go, my politics wasn't always in the same place. I've experienced things, I've lived through things, and now I can speak to you and connect with you because I want to take you on the same journey. I believe the Green Party can be the most popular party in this country. I believe we can have a Green government, but we don't do that by talking to a narrow group of people who have always believed in the Green Party or always been in the Green Party. We grow the party. I'm so excited that I'm hearing places like Bath had a local party meeting the other night. Apparently there was double the membership that there normally is, and I heard that every single person who was new there had joined the party because they wanted to vote for me. Good moment to say, by the way, that if people do align with our values, you can join the party by July 31st and vote in these leadership elections.
Okay, so what about that broadening of the Greens' electoral base? I mean, you've talked a lot about sticking to the tradition of the Green Party and its ethos. I mean, how important is it to reach out to voters who may have been on a similar journey to Zack or come from different traditions?
Well, it's absolutely key. I mean, we're talking about how you win first past the post elections as well as proportional representations like we need to do in Wales next year to make our breakthrough into the Senedd. All of that requires winning support from people who don't normally vote for you. Of course it does. That's core to my DNA and to all the elections that I've won myself or supported other people to win and the teams we built around that over 20 years now. So it's absolutely crucial that we do that. My point is we need to do that in a way where we respect both the core culture of the Green Party, open, respectful debate, bottom-up approach to politics, but also the distinctive identity, combining environmental and social justice. And especially at a time when we are seeing the potential of a new left-wing party, which is being discussed in the media. Let's see whether that happens. But if that does happen, just turning the Green Party into another generic left-wing party rather than our distinctive identity as the Green Party will not enable us to have that distinctive appeal. My experience on the doorstep, I spoke to voter after voter who said, I'm voting for you because I'm thinking about what the future's going to be like for my children and grandchildren. I want real action on the environment. Some of them are talking about climate. Some of them are talking about sewage in the rivers. That was what was influencing people from different parts of the spectrum, as well as, of course, traditional Labour voters coming behind us because we were the ones that had progressive economic policies to properly fund public services. So absolutely, we've got to carry on doing that and scale that up to get the huge electoral support that's needed to put us in a really influential position.
So yes, you mentioned the arrival of the new Left Party, Zara Sultana and Jeremy Corbyn. Does it threaten the Greens' chances? Does it threaten the Greens' popularity if another party pops up like this? And would you join forces with them if they do organise themselves, Zack?
I think the first thing to say is this is exactly why we need a bold Green Party. I don't accept Adrian's kind of description of it being us being a left-wing generic party. I think we are a Green Party that is very clear about our policies. That's not being generic. But what I think is also true is we should never have allowed the situation to happen where people are going, I really want a party that represents my values of compassion, of community, of care, of social justice, environmental justice, because that is the Green Party. So the first thing I'd say is to anyone who aligns with our values, whether they're a member of a party or indeed an MP of another party, if you align with our values, come join the Green Party. We have over 800 councillors, 4 MPs, 3 London Assembly members. We got nearly 2 million votes. We have a party and an organisation that is ready to win big at the next election, both next year at the local elections in places like London and indeed the Senedd, but right across the country and indeed at the next general election. In terms of joining forces, I think the first thing to say is, I'm not looking for electoral coalitions right now, but I am looking for intellectual coalitions. So with those people who align with us or where we agree with the values that we need to be taking the fight to reform and challenging this deeply unpopular Labour government, I want to work with anyone who agrees with those things. But I do think it's still possible for there not to be a new party. If we're very, very clear in the Green Party that we're a democratic, grassroots-led party where anyone who shares our current values is welcome to join the party. Because, again, I don't want to see a narrow party. I want to see a much broader party that aligns with our fundamental values. The Green Party was set up to, yes, be about the nature and climate emergency, but also to represent the poorest communities too. So I don't think I'm changing the Green Party into anything new. In fact, if anything, I'm going back to our core and saying, let's again focus on communities so we can send more MPs to Westminster.
You say work with that party. What does that mean? Does that mean sort of an unofficial pact where you stand aside in certain seats where it might be, profitable for either party to do so?
Well, I think the party doesn't even exist yet. So until we know who's leading it, what the membership is, what the policies are, at the moment it's unclear whether it's going to be a party or whether it's going to be some kind of movement or system. So again, in terms of the door is absolutely open, let's keep talking. It's very difficult to speculate right now what that looks like when it doesn't exist yet.
Fair enough. Adrian, what's your take on that new left party and how the Greens should approach it?
Well, first of all, to say that collaboration with other parties, people of different voting behaviours, but also people who are MPs from different parties, that is absolutely core to the Green Party's DNA, and we're doing that week in, week out in Parliament, just like Green councillors around the country are. So, for example, recently I put together an early day motion saying that if there's any proposal for military action in Iran, there has to be a vote in Parliament first. And I had MPs from 6 different parties supporting that proposal, including working with the independents who are looking at setting this up. I work with them all the time. And so we very much believe in that collaboration. But at the same time, we have to get across that the Green Party's distinctive identity around both environmental justice, challenging the government on its backsliding on nature and climate commitments, and us standing up for the poorest people in the UK and around the world, challenging the cuts to the aid budget, standing up for people who were threatened with losing their welfare benefits. That is core to what the Green Party is about. And so I'd say to anybody who is looking for a progressive alternative to Labour and supports Green Party values, do come behind us, join our growing movement. We're adding to our membership all the time. And there's people who've come from other different political traditions who've come behind us and found a home in the Green Party. And that's what we want to continue to build.
Can you imagine forming an electoral pact with such a party? I know we don't know the details of it yet.
Well, let's wait and see, because people often have a go at setting up new parties. It's actually not an easy thing to do. I remember Change UK, for example, which was thought to be the next big thing. What I would say is that we need to make sure that we retain our distinctive identity, because that is what keeps a broad coalition of voters behind us. We can communicate very progressive policies. The Green Party is clearly a very progressive party, but we do so in a way that has a broad appeal, and we also do in a way that's distinctively green. There are things that are different about green philosophy, green traditions from left traditions and other traditions. For example, we would challenge the idea that you measure the success of an economy based entirely on GDP. We want to look at how do we measure that an economy is actually delivering well-being for people and enabling us to live in harmony with the natural world. And that is different to other political traditions. And actually voters from different parts of the political spectrum really like that. So we've got to maintain our distinct identity and have that broad appeal. And that's what we've done in record numbers in the last few years.
Well, actually, I do want to ask both of you on this. I mean, who where have the Greens got the best chance of breaking through in 2029? Because you saw in the last election, I think 39 of the 40 places where they came second were in Labour seats. And does that mean that you should be focusing less on the kind of voters, ironically, like yours and Ellie's in your seats, Waveney Valley and North Herefordshire, the sort of what has been characterised perhaps, crassly as like the small c Conservative Greens, or the corduroy Greens, I think is what our political editor Andrew Marr calls them.
People like making these characterisations, don't they? But they are crass to the extent of being misleading. I mean, firstly, to win any first past the post seat, you have to have a broad coalition of supports. There were lots of traditional Labour voters, for example, that backed me in my constituency, saying that I was the best prospect for unseating a Conservative. So that's absolutely key, and it would be the same in winning a seat from Labour. We need to have a broad appeal. It's not about narrowing our appeal. But yes, there's lots of seats that were Labour this time, where the Greens finished a strong second following our bold campaign last year, where we've got a good chance of winning. I do think there are also plenty of seats like mine and Ellie's where you've got an incumbent Conservative who's complacent, who's been there for ages. You've got lots of Green councillors on the ground where we can come in and offer an alternative to people who've never had an alternative. There were people in my constituency who said, I've never voted for a winner before. I've always wanted a progressive MP. So we need to do that more, and we need to communicate the Green Party's message in a way that has that appeal. And what I can bring to this campaign is, yes, I'm an MP in a traditionally Conservative seat now, but just down the road, I cut my teeth in politics in Norwich, in a city that's traditionally Labour, where at a time when the Green Party had very little national profile, we went from the party being dormant when I first joined when I was 16 to winning our first council seats a few years later, to becoming the largest group of Green councillors in the country, winning seats in working class areas. And we did that through that grit, through that community organising that Zack's talking about, but which we've got a long tradition of doing, and which became our manual for how to win local elections on a big scale. So I've got the experience of winning in both those types of areas that I want to bring to this next phase of leadership and the huge ambition we have for 2029.
Okay, Zack, what do you think your left economic populism might be off-putting to some of the voters that Adrian's been talking about? The ones in Suffolk and in Herefordshire that the Greens made extraordinary gains winning their votes last year. What are you worried about only focusing on that specific sort of group?
No, I agree with Adrian's answer, actually. Inequality hurts you everywhere, whether you live in a town, a city, or indeed in the countryside. In the cities, it's obvious it's things like unscrupulous landlords, but in the farmers are being screwed over. Lots of them are tenant farmers. They're not getting a fair wage from the supermarkets or agricultural capital. Like, a lot of those issues, I think, are fundamental right across the board. So I think, again, they are part of the 99%, and this is exactly why we need a populist message, because it's not about separating the towns and the cities or people who live in rural areas. It's actually about saying all of these people have been let down by years and decades and generations of politics that hasn't worked for them. I think the other thing I'd say is 19 of those 39 seats are in London, so I think it's clearly a big moment for London in the next few years. And again, having a London Assembly member as the leader of a party, I think, would be useful with that, working alongside the MPs who can indeed also lift that rural vote too. I think also, I was in Yorkshire and the Humber just a couple of days ago, very clear places where people wouldn't necessarily associate the Green Party on the move, places like South Tyneside as well, previously such a deep Labour heartland. People more and more are feeling totally unhappy with the old party politics. The urgency of this moment cannot be underestimated, because I went out knocking with a journalist from a rival paper during the general election round Wiltshire, and she wrote in the article how surprised she was at how able I was to connect with dairy farmers, for instance, with the same message. I wasn't changing my message. It's just when you connect with people, people are people no matter where you live. But if we don't do this, Reform are going to do it, and Reform are going to do it faster than we are. And we know the crises are not going away. There's deep inequality in our society. We had racist riots on our streets last summer, and indeed the nature and climate crisis. So I think what's really at the heart of this whole election is this about steady incremental change and winning a few more MPs in Westminster, or is this about a people-led movement that is a mass movement where we're thinking bigger, we're staying authentic, we're staying kind, but we are taking the fight to the elites? And that's the leader I want to be.
Well, absolutely, Zack, but I'm not sure how you're suggesting there's any difference between us there. I mean, I'm not sure who you're saying is about incremental growth, because A, that's not what we've actually delivered in recent years. We've had huge growth, a hockey stick graph in our growth of number of councillors, quadrupling our number of MPs. And Ellie and I are extremely ambitious for that next phase of the party. We want to win enough MPs that we can hold the balance of power in Westminster, not because we want the power for ourselves, but because we want the power for our communities to tackle the poverty, to tackle the climate and nature crises, to make sure the rich are paying their way and we can fund public services. And we can do that by building on the huge successes we've had in recent years and the lessons that we've learnt from them about how we have a broad appeal to enough people to win seats under the voting system that we've got.
How many MPs do you want to win? Have you got a target?
Well, I think the honest answer, and Zack may say the same, we'll see, is that the party is going through a process at the moment of choosing our seats that we're going to start to campaign in, and a good proportion of which will become target seats for next time. And we do need to go through that process. A lot of it depends, for example, on how much money we can bring in to scale up our operations. And I've got a significant track record in fundraising, both for the party and for charities that I've led. That's a crucial skill, as is the fact that we've got to build our movement. We've got to continue growing our membership base, growing all of our operations to be able to scale that up. So it will be significantly more than we targeted last time, clearly. And it will be a question of how many do we need to be targeting to have a good chance of having real power and influence if there is a hung parliament.
Can I respond?
Yeah,
so
of course,
I agree with that part of the answer. I just want to be really specific about what I see the difference as. Our 4 MPs are doing a really solid job, and I've not come here to say anything differently. I'm really proud that I helped get them elected. I'm really proud of the work they're doing. I also think if we're really honest with ourselves, we are not having the impact in the last year that we need to have. And that's no one's fault. In a very small team of MPs, they need to focus on their constituents. I think if you look at the Lib Dems, they've got 72 MPs. I think we'd love 72 MPs right now, but they don't have a coherent narrative. No one quite knows why they got elected. They had 72 hyper-local campaigns. So they're not breaking through. On the first day of this new parliament, Ed Davey, for God's sake, was stood there kicking a football, challenging Keir Starmer to a FIFA tournament. Fine, that's going to get you a headline. But actually, if we really want to change this country, if we really want the Green Party to be a bold movement that's effective, that's going to transform the country, then we need the 4 MPs working their socks off as they are in parliament. But we also need a separate team, 3 people in a leadership team who can get around this country, connect with communities, be on media, build the party. And I think that's the future of the Green Party.
Okay, thank you. And I know a lot of our listeners and our viewers are very concerned about housing. They can't get on the housing ladder. They're being pushed out of the very expensive cities that they live in. The Greens have opposed the Planning and Infrastructure Bill on the basis that it threatens key natural habitats. We often hear NIMBY accusations from our listeners and readers, if you don't mind me saying, and I just wanted to know how you respond to that. Adrian, you go.
Well, there were 2 key reasons why we opposed the Planning and Infrastructure Bill. The first was that it would not address the affordable housing crisis that we have in this country. My constituents and people I meet all around the country say to me exactly what you've just said, that the housing that's being built is not affordable. People are being priced out of being able to live in their own communities, and we need far more affordable housing, particularly far more social housing, council housing, with councils empowered and funded to build that. But that's not what this bill is about. It doesn't include clear targets for affordable housing. It's effectively a developer's charter setting targets for development, but not requiring that a high amount of that's got to be affordable housing. So that's no answer at all. And yes, at the same time, as you say, it does weaken protections. That bill weakens protections for the natural environment at a time when we need to be strengthening them, those protections, because we've got one of the most nature depleted countries on earth, and we're nowhere near meeting our nature restoration targets. We have targets for restoring nature that should be just as well known about, just as high up the political agenda as the targets for net zero. They're just as important in terms of the existential crises that we face. So both of those things matter. And, Labour will be misleading you if they try and claim this is about affordable housing. As it's written, that bill is a developer's charter.
Right, Zack, I mean, you've said you want to represent the precariat. How do you reconcile that with the Greens' position on bills like this?
Every word that Adrian just said is true, and that's why I'm really glad he's an MP representing our party. Look, the developers donate to the Labour Party, so it's not surprising that they then put out PR that suggests that the Green Party are trying to block things. Rachel Reeve has gone to war with bats and newts. We shouldn't be surprised she's not gone to war with badgers and otters, for instance, because they're animals that people love and they're cute. So she's tried to separate the animals out, which is, I think, very kind of revealing of Labour's attitude towards everything. The Wildlife Trust released a report that showed in 97% of planning cases, bats and newts aren't even mentioned. So the idea in some way that nature is what is getting in the way of building council housing is absolutely absurd and frankly offensive. And it's why we need to come out fighting on this issue. We absolutely need lots more council housing. We need to put brownfield sites first. And the idea that Labour say that we're trying to block things when the amount of developers who are sitting on land and land banking demonstrates that the solution to this problem is really clear, and it's to make the developers build, it's to push them, it's to do new regulation. And just the fact that the Labour government are so unwilling to do that and will point blame at anyone else but the people who are donating to so many of their MPs demonstrates how this is a government who is in vested interests. The Green Party's only vested interests are people and planet, and it'll stay that way.
Okay. And I mean, I want to ask you about your policy focuses. It's a bit difficult to sort of just invent policy, isn't it? Because the Green Party is a very democratic organisation and your members decide. But is there anything, that you'd be looking to introduce if you won the leadership election that, isn't part of the Green Party's prospectus now? It's your opportunity to do some blue sky thinking.
Well, I think we have a really wide-ranging manifesto that sets out a long-term vision for society. The task we had as a leadership team, but working with all of the expertise we have and amongst our membership and amongst our staff, was to turn that into a bold manifesto for this Parliament at the last election and show the differences that could make during those 5 years. And I was really proud that we could show, for example, where Labour's trying to claim there's tough choices to make. Well, we've been really clear. They're tough choices are actually tough choices that they're impacting on the poorest people in society, people who are suffering from cuts to universal credit and welfare benefits, people who are losing access to special educational needs, for example. These things need proper funding. And we were able to show that in a fully costed manifesto that stood the test of scrutiny. I was able to defend it right throughout the general election from some very tough questioning, that there was an alternative vision that was fully practical for the country and would tackle the inequalities that we face as well as the environmental crises. And so I think it's about turning that bold long-term vision, which is what inspired me to join the Green Party when I was 16. I read the manifesto, agreed every word of it, and got involved in order to help in whatever way I could. I didn't necessarily expect it to lead to what it has led to, but it's about how, as leaders, how you turn that into a manifesto for the next 5 years that, yes, is bold, and our manifesto last year absolutely was bold, but it's also got to be credible, because if you put forward policies that journalists are able to present as pie in the sky, then you'll just come unstuck very quickly. And I think we got that balance between being bold and being credible absolutely right at the election. And that's what enabled us to do what we haven't done for so long and increase our number of MPs.
Yeah, I agree with most of it. I don't recognise this balance between boldness and credibility. I think at the moment when the country is so unequal, when things feel so broken, and when we need such transformational change, I think you absolutely can and must be both bold and credible. And I would say the boldness is actually building credibility, because you're saying changing this country is not tinkering around the edges. We need to nationalise our water companies. We need to nationalise our energy companies. I'm really interested, it's already Green Party policy, but in universal basic income. Been working a lot with Guy Standing, who's one of the leading voices around the world, piloting universal basic income pilots around the world. We've just been working recently, or been involved with a pilot around care workers, which was happening in Wales. Care experienced young people face huge inequalities. But what I'm really interested in and want to put forward in this campaign is, what would a basic income for farmers look like? Because actually farmers are vital to tackling the climate crisis. They're crucial for our food security, and no one knows the land better than the people who work with it. And as I was saying previously, they're people who are being hit by deep inequality, whether they're farmers living in the countryside, or in fact even farmers that are in my constituency in London. And so a basic income for farmers is one example of something where I think we could get really specific. Obviously, I want a universal basic income, but I think we should start with particular groups, and care workers also should be on that list.
Thank you. We're running out of time. This has been such a good discussion, but I don't think we can do any more policy ideas at the moment, but I'm sure we'll speak to you during the course of the campaign. I just wanted to ask, actually, and do correct me if I'm wrong, I've read that you're both vegan, so I did want to ask each of you, what's your favourite or your best vegan recipe that you cook up when you get home from a tough day of campaigning?
I'm a long-term vegan, and I mean, I particularly like vegan curries of all sorts. Maybe something like chickpea and cauliflower with some greens would be particularly nice.
Sounds good.
Also long-term vegan, but I do also want to add that you don't have to be vegan to be in the Green Party.
No.
It's often a misconception.
I never suggested that.
No, for sure. And we need system change, not individual responsibility. That being said, if someone does want to be vegan and want to try it for the first time, my spaghetti bolognese is pretty good. Everything else I cook is terrible, but that's the one I've mastered.
What replaces the mince in your spaghetti bolognese?
Just often corn or
lentils.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, nice. Okay, well, maybe a cook-off should decide the outcome of this leadership. I think that would be fairest.
That one